Welcome to the Leading at the Next Level podcast with Dove Development Consulting, the show built to provide ongoing support for your leadership journey. Before we move into today's lesson, let's make sure we're on the same page. We've seen firsthand how much more is required to provide authentic leadership to a team than to simply manage based on the authority that comes with a title or position. What we've learned through more than 50 combined years of leadership responsibility is that taking the extra steps to serve people and earn influence will always produce results that barking orders never will. If you'll stick with us to the end of this episode, we'll share how you can get a complimentary trial to a resource that we've built that's like nothing else you've ever seen. Now, with that in mind, let's get to work. What we're going to do in this episode is pick up in the idea of profitability killers, this time starting off a look at the cost of high turnover. Over the last several years, I've frequently referenced a study that initially found, I think it was from Gallup, it cited the Bureau of Labor Statistics data in saying, here's the quote, okay, according to a Gallup study, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics has found that the U.S. voluntary turnover rate, voluntary is a key word there, we'll come back to that, is 23.4% annually. It's generally estimated that replacing an employee costs a business 1/2 to 5 times that employee's annual salary. The study goes on to say, so if 25% of a business's workforce leaves and the average pay is $35,000, the average pay is $35,000. I'm stressing that because I want you to remember that stat. It could cost a 100-person firm between $438,000 and $4 million a year to replace employees. Again, if the average pay is $35,000, it could cost a 100-person firm between $438,000 and $4 million a year to replace employees. Now, while I believe that alone makes an incredibly strong point about how expensive turnover is in an organization, the cost of turnover can be so much more, and that's the profitability killer that I want to really dig into with you here. So nearly every time that I've shared that stat that I just read to you with a group of leaders, I've challenged them to really consider how even the most conservative numbers in that quote, that 438,000 and the 35,000 per employee or average salary, how that really ties back, how it fits their own organization. But I've come to realize that it doesn't capture the entire picture. First, let's consider how much companies' average wage is today since the minimum wage. Now, again, I've used that stat for several years, at least 5 years I've used that stat. So let's consider, since the average minimum wage that what an average company's wage is now, since the minimum wage just in the last 2 years has nearly doubled, going from $7.25 an hour to $12 an hour as I share this, with $15 an hour being widely discussed as the target that's most likely going to be achieved sooner than later across the board, across the country. Now, let's also factor in the combination of what COVID, the pandemic, did to the workforce, but costs and so on, this thing that we've heard referred to as the Great Resignation. And that's really resulted in help wanted signs being in businesses and just about everywhere we're driving by or any place we're walking in. Gosh, we see them almost every single day, right? The help wanted signs. Now, at the risk of having a flag thrown on me for piling on right here, I want you to consider the companies. So we're in the Shenandoah Valley. We've got a gasoline station convenience store chain called Sheetz. Many of you across the country might know that as Wawa or Walmart. Even consider that here in the Shenandoah Valley, even there's those places for starting level full-time positions are offering $17 to $18 an hour. And just think about how that impacts things and how much that combined with the significantly higher minimum wage, it all but forces companies to increase even the starting level wage, the entry level wage for a skilled or even a semi-skilled role that just a couple of years ago, as recent as 2019, had been between $14 and $17 an hour for somebody, say, coming out of a tech school. And we can't hardly pretend that all these things that I've just mentioned, that it doesn't spill over into each and every other pay range on our company ladder, right? Because if the entry level wage has gone up substantially, we can't expect the other ranges to stay the same, or that's going to create some ill intent too, right? Or malintent with our folks. Now, quite honestly, I'm absolutely convinced, based on those things that I just shared, that that 438,000 for a 100-person company, the low end, mind you, that was referenced in that now dated Gallup study, that no longer exists. It's not even something we can consider, especially when we're seeing starting wages for those full-time retail positions at or above that $35,000 annual salary here in the sleepy but beautiful Shenandoah Valley, where, gosh, the cost of living has traditionally been way lower than the larger metropolitan areas, only say an hour or so in any given direction, the Charlottesvilles, the Washington, D.C.s, the Richmonds, whatever. We have so much lower cost of living, but if we're seeing those things, those entry-level wages in retail at $16, $17, $18 an hour, I can only imagine what's going on in other places where the cost of living is significantly higher. Now, I've got a really tough time imagining that any organization, for them to maintain an average salary of 35,000 just doesn't happen. I struggle even to think that it's under 50, quite frankly. And anything that I've hit on here to this point has been tied just to those Bureau of Labor Statistics norms. So how much is the cost of high turnover? How much really is it? And how can we capture the profit that it's killing when we've got high turnover in an organization? Now, before we begin working through any more of that, let's make sure we're on the same page with exactly what turnover I'm referring to, because it ain't all bad, right? Let's be honest. There's sometimes when turnover is necessary. Now, that doesn't mean it's not difficult, and that certainly doesn't mean that there's not cost involved. But every business that I've ever interacted with is going to have situations, or has had situations, where they've got to deal with a performance situation where it's maybe not where it should be, or maybe somebody's not aligned with the culture, the values, they're just not on track. There's issues, right? And from time to time, we get to celebrate somebody who's made it to retirement. Neither of those things are really what I'm addressing here in this lesson when I'm talking about the cost of high turnover. The turnover that I've always been most concerned about focusing on, and I've worked to minimize in the organizations we've worked directly with, regardless of how high it is, even if it's low for the industry, has always been the voluntary kind, the kind where maybe a great team member chooses to leave and it could have been prevented. I believe that a significant profitability killer, and two of the things that we've already addressed in this series, top-down leadership, poor communication, I believe those things play into and really drive that turnover percentage up and make it an even more significant profitability killer in and of itself. Now, in this lesson, we're going to take a look at those, as well as how a few other things can really be causing that high turnover that's voluntary, and it's the most expensive type we've got to deal with. So once we've worked through our internal employee turnover calculation, and we've developed a turnover meaning that really focuses on the part that's killing our profitability the most, it's time that we get really, really serious about identifying the causes. Now, if we want to get a handle on the cost of high turnover, especially the voluntary turnover that involves team members who would genuinely make our organizations better if they stayed, we've got to take a hard look at the reasons behind this specific type of turnover. An article I found on PeopleKeep as I'm researching for this lesson for what we're working through here, it was called Employee Retention, the Real Cost of Losing an Employee. It shared this as some of the top reasons for employee turnover. It listed lack of career development opportunities, listed lack of employee engagement, poor company culture, lack of or poor employee benefits and annual compensation, disagreements with coworkers or management, no clear business goals or direction. Employees feel like their honest feedback and thoughts aren't considered. Now, I've shared this next stat from John Maxwell. I've heard him say it over and over and over. It was in Leadership Gold, and I've heard him reference it a number of times. I've said it in different things as it relates to profitability killers we're looking at, but I believe it calls for considering it once more here. John said in that Leadership Gold book, he said some sources estimate that as many as 65% of people leaving companies do so because of their managers. The company, in quotes, doesn't do anything negative to them. People do. He goes on to say, sometimes coworkers cause the problem that prompt people to leave, but often the people who alienate employees are their direct supervisors. Now, as I think about each of the 7 items listed in that article from PeopleKeep, I believe they all tie back to how we lead our teams. Yes, all 7 of them. Now, the other thing that really grabbed me about that list was that benefits and compensation didn't even merit being listed separately, and they didn't take the top spot on the list even when they were listed together. Let's get incredibly honest with ourselves here. Pay, that benefits, that compensation, let's lump it into pay for now. It's definitely an issue in the overall turnover equation, but it's rarely, and I'm going to stress rarely, the issue. To start, I believe if we were to say consider any given individual on our team, and we were to ask ourselves if they would ever have become a part of our organization if we'd paid, say, half of what our competitors do, the answer would be clear. No, they wouldn't be there anyway. So let's just pretend that our pay's in line. We wouldn't have to wonder why they'd left at that point, because we would have never had them there in the first place if we weren't at least in the same ballpark. Now, that being said, it's still our responsibility as leaders to make sure that we're consistently providing the best opportunities for each individual and organization that we possibly can. Not necessarily and I'm going to stress that we should not be looking for ways to milk every ounce of energy we can out of them just for the benefits they give us. That's not leadership. Now, just in case you've never seen it, there's a pretty cool law about sowing and reaping that's in 2 Corinthians 9:6. So you might want to check that out if you're not sure what I'm referring to there. Now, I'm going to challenge you here to consider one more thing that I think contradicts the idea that much turnover at all is really tied to wage. Now, if compensation were the only factor, or even the biggest factor that motivated what folks did, how many folks would be volunteering? How many folks would we see in organizations like Rotary or Lions or Ruritans or any type of civic organization, or even fire and rescue for that matter? And how many people would enlist to serve in the military? In every one of those things, we raise our hands to be part of a cause that serves a greater purpose. Usually, in many of the ones I just listed, it's at our own expense in some way, shape, or form. So as long as the total compensation that we offer for our organizations, that we're offering the individuals, as long as it's competitive, I can't realistically consider it to be much of an issue in the big picture. So we'll kind of keep that in mind as we work forward here. Now, since we've got the money part addressed, I think the real issue, the real causes of employee turnover deserve our attention. So as leaders, we impact each of the other 6 items that was on that list, and we impact them each and every day. The hard part can be coming to terms with why each of those things deserve time out of our busy schedules, because once we've accepted leadership, it's heavy. We've got a lot of different things that's constantly trying to suck up our time. To make a case for that, we need to have a clear understanding of exactly who pays the cost of that high turnover. So for the majority of the folks who are investing their time here with us, live or in the digital side of this program, into really working through this content with me, I'm guessing that you need very, very little additional convincing to ensure that you're being intentional about addressing each of the things that made the list, those top 7 lists that are referenced a little bit for the top reasons is turnover. But at some point in time, each of us is going to have somebody on our team who holds leadership responsibility. Notice I didn't call them a leader, but hasn't necessarily come to terms with just how important it is to take care of their people while they push them for results, right? It's a balancing act, right? And if we're being completely honest with ourselves, even the best servant leaders among us will still face times where the pressure to produce the results that we need impacts the focus we have on our people, at least slightly. Sometimes this really boils down to having a crystal clear understanding of that exactly who pays that price for turnover, that high price, if you will. Several years ago, I'm helping a friend recruit a few key people to his rapidly growing business. It was just amazing to watch. I was doing some fun work with him there. And I learned something that I thought has been incredibly valuable through how he asked one simple question in that interview process. Now, my friend, he drew several circles on a sheet of paper that each had one word inside. So he would write you, meaning the candidate, whatever their name was, Joe, Bob, Mary, Sam, Donna, whatever, in that circle. He would write his name as the owner of the company in one of the circles. He would write the company's name in a circle, and then he would write the word team and the word customer in a different circle. And where it got really fun, he would then ask the candidate to point to which one of those circles that they felt was the most important in the overall picture. Now, the circle the candidate pointed to mattered far less than their explanation for that decision. Now, the part that really resonated with me the most was how that owner differentiated himself from the company as a whole. He explained that in so many cases, individual team members can see the company as this larger than life entity that exists outside of any of the names in the circle. It's just this thing, right? Well, it made sense immediately when I considered it to the larger organizations I've worked with or been a part of. I'd never really considered how much that idea really applied to smaller, locally owned businesses just as much, if not more, right? So, my key takeaway from all that, in any business, every decision and action does indeed impact every single member of the organization. The challenging part, something that rarely happens, is ensuring that each and every member of a team has a clear understanding of how their daily behaviors and responsibilities have a direct impact on the company as a whole, quote unquote, how their own livelihood, and every individual around them. It just doesn't stop at any one of those pieces. Now, when it comes to how high turnover kills our profitability, especially for those of us that have accepted that responsibility for leading a team, not just managing the department by cracking a whip, it's critical that we understand how the cost of high turnover ultimately touches everybody in the organization in one way or another. Now, there are indeed decisions that are made in a company level, at the high level, that dictate things that we're going to need to do in our own roles, or maybe how we'll need to handle certain situations. But even then, those decisions are driven by people. The company itself isn't some self-perpetuating entity with a life of its own. A company's made up by people. So sometimes when people say it's a company decision, well, gosh, that's kind of not taking responsibility for the role in that decision, right? The approach we take in those situations plays a significant part in how any given team member resonates with those reasons that cause high turnover, right? And while the cost of that turnover is the price the company pays, it's also a price that cascades down to us as leaders, every individual on our team, as well as the customers we serve. Now, to make matters worse, this cost isn't isolated to just the human resources team's budget. It spills over into several other critical parts of our business, some parts that are tracked closely on a daily basis, and some that are often considered intangible because of the difficulty in measuring them. Now, moving forward, we're going to dig into some of those other areas that are impacted. Then we're going to work through some specific things that we can each do to give our best people, the best ones in our organization, a solid reason that they should stick with us.
Thanks for listening to the Leading at the Next Level podcast. Next time, we'll pick up where we left off by digging into just how far those turnover costs reach in every organization. Now, if you'd like to dig deeper into anything that we've shared here, or you need continuing education credits for your professional credential, send us an email at admin@dove-development.net, and we'll be happy to hook you up with a complimentary 45-day trial access to our entire Leading at the Next Level program. And again, that's at no cost. This full program, it includes access to well over 100 hours of digital lessons, complete with slides and action-based assessments to help make sure that you can capture measurable bottom line improvements in your organization. That program also has 2 live lessons each month with Q&A, so we can really help you identify the specific action that you want to take to lead your team more effectively.